My motion graphics.
Hey, welcome back to our third part of our Cubes into Letters remix, re-upload, version 2.0, improved version, hardcore pro version, you name it, you know what I'm talking about. So right now we have our render done and we're going to import it into After Effects and make it look sweet. So I'm gonna double click over here on our project and I already have my render 3D folder set up, which means that I only need to click on my first frame and make sure that PNG sequence is checked on. Yeah, next really important step. You need to right click, interpret footage and go to main. Once you do that, you have the alpha channel over here that is should set to pre-multiplied matte, not actually sure how to pronounce this, with color black, which should be there by default. And we're gonna assume this frame rate is 29.97. Yeah, let me just make sure that everything was okay. So pre-multiplied, that's really important. And if you don't have this, it means that you forgot to check that alpha box that I've mentioned before in Cinema 4D. Okay, so we have this done. Now we're dragging this into a new comp over here, like so. And let's take a quick RAM preview of what we did. It looks pretty good, pretty decent. It might look a little bit small in the end, but it's not, because this is an actual HD file, so it doesn't look that small. And it's gonna work. Okay, next. Before I actually continue, I really need to make this maybe a little bit longer in the end, just to give it a little bit more time, maybe 1 second more. So I'm actually going into my composition settings and I'm going to add 30 frames to this. So 210 should be fine. And zoom out a bit. And now I have more space over here. And to make my text, my footage, to fill this space with my footage, I'm going into my last frame, duplicate the frame, so duplicate the footage. On the bottom one, I'm going to right click, time, freeze frame. And I'm going to use a shortcut, which is Command-Shift-D. And I'm going to delete this last part. You can use the close brackets and open brackets, I believe, if you're using an English keyboard. I'm not. And for me, it's just easier to do it this way instead of changing my preferences and all that stuff. So it just works. In any case, now we have a still image in the end, and we have our footage ready to go. So next, I want to drag these cubes into a new comp. Okay. And now I have a new comp, it's called Cubes 2, no problem. I'm going to rename this one, so select it, hit enter and rename this to Original. Yeah. So this is my original comp and I'm going to create a background. So right click over here somewhere where you have a blank space and create new solid. Then we're going to call it background or something like so, maybe BG, because we like staying alive. And choose whatever color you want, it doesn't really matter. Next, let's go into our presets and hit ramp. And you have this gradient ramp, so let's double click on it if you have your background selected, or just click and drag into the layer. Now we have a background. Let's set the ramp shade to radial. Let's swap the colors and zoom out a bit. Let's hit here on this bullseye and click on the center. This will set our white to start off in the center and the black I'm gonna drag it somewhere over here next to our bottom left corner. And now we're gonna pick the colors. So this is kind of a hard process to pick the colors that you actually think or feel that it might work. I'm gonna try a little bit right now. To be honest, I already know what color I'm going to use, so I'm gonna paste the value over here because I have it already in my clipboard. This is the value I want to use, but you know, you can spend some time trying to try to figure out what color suits you the best. This is not looking that good. The colors, they don't really match, but that's okay because we are going to color correct it. So first of all, I'm at the original. I want to make I want to bring a tint over here and just click and drag the tint over to the original, and now everything is at black and white. My footage is in black and white, and that's, or in grayscale, and obviously that's not what we want, but this is a start. So next we're going to curves, yeah, and I'm going to drag the curves over here. And what we want to do is come over to the channel, choose the blue, and just bring the blue up a bit, like so. And we can change the other channels here, but one thing I like to do is to keep one effect per channel, just because it's easier to read. So I'm gonna rename this to blue, and I'm gonna drag another curves over here, and I think I'm gonna check the red. I'm gonna take off some reds like so, and now we have again another blue, and it will be hopefully a different blue than we had before. Let me just select all of them and try to add and remove. So as you can see, the blue is slightly different, and it kind of matches a little bit better with the bottom background, right? Now what we need to do, so this is the red. I hear some sirens, not a good sign. Hope they don't come over here. Anyway, so let's add some curves again. Now we need to, not cubes, curves. Now we need to bring out some brightness into our footage. So we're gonna just click and drag over here on our top right corner, somewhere around there, just to bring out some highlights. That's nice. And another click over here just to bring the darks a little bit more, to give it a little bit more contrast. Now we can always enable and disable just to see the difference from what we had to what we have, and we can also do the same with every single one of them at the same time. And we can see that now the footage kind of, you know, blends a little bit better with the background. And it's not perfect yet, but we're gonna do some small adjustments, maybe to the backgrounds, the gradients. Let's just tweak this a bit more. Try to make it closer to the black, maybe. Bring it out, bring it in a little bit. And you know, just, it's a matter of keep playing around, and probably this is not even the best color, but you know. One thing I should mention is it's kind of good to make your foreground different from your background in terms of colors, contrast, values, something. It should, you know, pop out a little bit. But we're still going to make something else, which is we're going to create a new solid. So right click, new, solid, and we're going to make this solid white. And here we're going to rename this solid to, I don't know, maybe kind of a glowish something, glowish. And we're going to bring that between the background and our original footage, right? Next, we're going to create an ellipse tool. So double click on that with your glowish layer selected, double click on that, and you'll get this mask. Now what we want to do is double click on the yellow line on the mask, and then we're going to rescale this so that it, where's the shortcut? Yeah, command. So that it kind of fits like so. Let me just maybe bring this over here and double click again, just rescale it. Great. Next, we need to open the mask parameters over here. I've just added a keyframe. I'm going to undo that. That was an accident. And increase the feather, yeah, so that we have kind of a blurred, we don't have those sharp edges. And keep rescaling this until it fits properly. Now what I want to do is to give that that poppiness, right? I'm lacking the term, but it kind of makes the difference, right? It doesn't blend that much with the background, so we have something that kind of makes us understand that this is our foreground and that's the background. And we can change that a little bit later. Maybe change a little bit its size, like so. Maybe the transparency and all that stuff, but we'll get there. In any case, this looks really better. I might change the opacity or maybe increase the feather a bit more and bring down the opacity by hitting T on your keyboard and then bringing the opacity down and trying to find the perfect spot. This looks fair enough. 81% looks pretty decent for now. Great. Next, what we need next. Yeah, one thing we didn't do is we should ramp scatter this background, and the reason why is that you probably you'll probably see some kind of lines around your background, along your gradient, and that's not cool. But if we increase these values, you'll get a better looking, hopefully a better looking background. In any case, we will later on change our footage to, we can do it already. I'm going to change these to 16 bits. And for that, let's click over here where it says 8 bits per channel, 8 BPC. I'm going to change that to 16 bits per channel, and our colors will hopefully turn a lot better. Now, obviously, I'm pretty sure that you may not be able to see the difference on the video, but here on my screen, it makes a huge difference. And hopefully it will do in yours as well. So just adjusting the scatter, that looks good. Okay, so we keep moving on, and things are looking pretty decent right now. What we need to do right now is give it some kind of special effects, like something that will blend everything together and make it look less 3D. And by less 3D, I mean so that it doesn't look straight from a 3D application, okay? And that's one of the mighty powers of After Effects. So let's duplicate our original footage by hitting Command D or Control D. And over here, we're gonna call this glow. And we're gonna pick, we're gonna delete probably these blue, red curves. We don't need that. We need the tint. That's pretty cool and helpful. We're gonna drag a curves effect, and we're just going to give it a little bit more contrast by creating an S shape like so. So now we have, let's just turn this on and off, a little bit more contrast, and I'm looking for these kind of bright parts to pop out a little bit, maybe like so and like so. And next we're gonna pick the Luma key, and I'm gonna bring this over here. So now I'm going to solo my layer, and I'm going to bring up the threshold just like so. And as you can see, everything that's dark starts to disappear. It really disappears. If I show you the alpha channel over here, as you can see, this is what we have. Okay, pretty good. And there's no right or wrong value. So yeah, let me just bring this over here. There's no right or wrong value. It's just trial and error. Just see what it fits best. But for now, let's leave it maybe like so, and maybe or like that. And to get rid of these small lines that I'm not actually sure that you can see right now, but there are some small sharp lines, some weird lines, we're gonna increase the edge thin to maybe 1, and that's gonna get rid of everything. Next, we're gonna pick a Gaussian blur, that's right. Oops, and let's bring the Gaussian blur beneath and increase the blurriness just a touch, like so. Maybe 7 will be okay. And okay, so if we unsolo this, we can now see kind of a blurrish highlights over here and there. Although over here it's kind of a grayish blur, so that's not cool. Let's make this layer, let's put it to add, so it kind of adds the color, okay, and it makes like more of a light effect than a color effect or a color layer. And we might see if it works or not. We might, like for example this part over here, I might want to extract that part. I'm not actually sure if it works. Like for example this grayish part, I can just increase the threshold and it will get rid of the grayish parts. Let's unsolo back the layer, and as you can see, it's probably better right now. Although we do have something over here, maybe we'll increase that a bit more, like so. Again, there's no right or wrong, it really depends on your footage, and I think that's okay. So we've isolated all the brightness, all the bright spots, the real bright spots on our layer, right? And this is, and then we added a blur to it and added the add mode so that it would light our scene on those spots with a little bit of blur, maybe some more, like maybe 10. Who knows, right? Okay, and now it's looking better. Let's take a look at over here. If I hide this glow for a minute, you can clearly see the difference. And there's something more to it, so it has a little bit more interest and it looks better. And that's the point, right? Great, next, let's duplicate this glow layer and let's call this directional blur. We can name it 1 because we're gonna make several of them. And we're gonna get rid of this Gaussian blur. And instead of the Gaussian blur, we're gonna add a directional blur. Let's bring this over here. Let's pick an angle. I'm gonna stick with the 45 degrees. And let's increase the blur length. And as you can see, we get this sharp kind of sparkles over here and there. Let's increase this a bunch. Like really a bunch. Okay, always a good idea to keep track of several frames so that you can see what's happening and try to see what's happening on your comp. Okay, as you can see here, it's not very relevant, but here it does make a lot of difference. Good, but if you want more over here, we can decrease this threshold. So what it does is that, let me just what's happening, let me just delete, yeah, hide this for now. If I play with the threshold, I can get more bright parts or less bright parts. So the bigger the value, the less brightness, right? So the less bright it will get from the footage. So we can play with that in order to get more or less sparkling. So maybe, I don't know, this is probably too much. Let's try like so. Maybe too much. Although we can play with the transparency or with the opacity of our layer. This is probably too much, but I will play with the opacity a bit. So with the layer selected, let's hit T and just bring that down and try to tune it until it looks decent. And this might look pretty good. Okay. I think it looks good for now. Now let's duplicate this once more. Yeah. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing, but now I'm going to scale this footage like so. And so we have a little bit more of an atmosphere going on, right? Okay, pretty good. And we can play with this. We can add and subtract and maybe duplicate, and we can even play with some different angles, although I'm gonna leave it like it is. And I'm probably going to try to add some sparkles, but smaller ones. So I'm gonna duplicate this directional blur, maybe 2. Let's make the 3, no problem. Let's isolate this one for a minute. Let's get rid of this directional blur, or instead let's just bring down the blur length a lot. Let's make it like 10, maybe increase that, play with the threshold. This one I want it to be really tiny, and increase the blur length a bit, maybe increase that a little bit more, and maybe a little bit less, like so, so that we have some sparkles over here and there. Let's see how that works. Over here, hide it. It's probably too much. I think this one is scaled, yes. Let's bring back the scale to 100% so that it fits the comp. Solo it again and keep playing with that until we get small, tiny pieces of light. Somewhere, here and there, just to make that difference. Maybe even more threshold. Let me just solo this, and yeah, we have small tiny spots of light. You can barely see them. Here are some of them, for example, and they will just add a little bit more of interest to our scene. That's pretty much it. Okay, we're pretty much done, but we still need to make one or two things. I'm probably gonna bring a little bit of contrast in our footage, so let's go back into the original. On our curves, let's try to bring a little bit this over here, and as I said before, it's on the small details that you get better and better, and small details do make a difference. So if you can spend a little bit more time than I will today working, adjusting all these values, it's usually a good idea. Now we're missing 2 or 3 things, but not much. One of them is the motion blur. We're gonna add motion blur in a really simple way, and it's gonna work really well, I guess. I personally believe that the best motion blur you can get is probably from Cinema 4D, but it takes a long time to render, so usually I try to avoid that. I try to use it as often as I can, but sometimes it's just impossible because it really increases the render time a lot. But there are other ways to simulate motion blur that actually they, from times to times, depending on your subject, doesn't work. It does work pretty well. So we're gonna do that in the end, but first of all, we're actually going to pre-compose everything. So we have the cubes 2, let's make the cubes 3. So I'm gonna drag these cubes 2 over here. Now we have everything pre-composed, and we can do stuff like, for example, duplicate this one. So this is the original now. Now we have the cubes 2, and this one we're gonna add some, maybe some fast blur. Add some fast blur. Make sure you have repeat edge pixels, and increase the blurriness like so, maybe not that much, like so. And we're gonna create an ellipse tool, so double click on that. Now we have a mask, right? And what we're seeing, let me just solo this, is the blurred part in the middle. We want the opposite, so we're gonna invert the mask over here, and then we are going to open up the mask menu and increase the feather like so. Great. Now we are going to unsolo this, and click somewhere else so that we don't see the mask. And this will make a slight difference over here and there. It will just give it a little bit of a blurrish surrounding, and kind of makes it like a focus, kind of invents a depth of field. It's a trick, right? It's not a real depth of field, but you know, we are allowed to cheat, so pretty cool. So one last thing, and this thing I leave it for last, which is, first of all, yeah, I was almost forgetting, we should play with the opacity of the thing, so of our effects. For example, if we feel like stuff might be too heavy, we can play with the opacity. So for example, the original, I don't want to play with that, but the glow, I might want to decrease that and maybe increase that a bit more and try to fine tune and, you know, find that sweet spot where the glow kind of suits good. And these directional blurs, we also want to do the same thing. So we don't want too much, we don't want too less. So we really need to find the sweet spot. And the time you invest during this process is also very helpful, and it will determine the quality of your overall work. So obviously I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but I think that this looks pretty cool. And yes, now we're heading to our last step, which is to add the motion blur. So let's pick our CC Force motion blur. Let's drag this into our original footage like that. And nothing happens, right? Let's just try and look for some place where we can find movement, like so. And we see nothing. So what we need to do is we need to double click on our original footage and then double click on this little icon over here, which is the frame blending. And we want to double click on that until we have this, or click on that until we have this line from bottom left to top right. And then let's just go back over here where we were. And then when we click this icon over here, we should see something going on. And as you can see, it's rendering this frame, and it's taking a little bit longer to render a single frame than it did before. Now we do have some motion blur right now, although it doesn't look that good, but we can increase the quality of it just by increasing the number of samples from 8 to 16, for example. It's gonna give us a more soft blur, and that looks okay. And if you think the blur looks too long, you can increase this value. I'm not sure if it's to increase or to decrease, I never know, but increasing or decreasing the value will make the blur longer or shorter. Is to decrease. So let's bring this to 90. This is the shutter angle. It's how cameras work actually. So I think this looks pretty good for now. And as you can see, each frame takes a little longer to render. And this is because of our motion blur basically. So if we uncheck that and check it again, we clearly see the difference, and it really looks a lot better. Let's just take a look at another frame with on and off. And it is an artificial blur. Sometimes here and there you might see something that you will not like, but eventually during the animation the spectator won't have time to realize that there's a spot that doesn't really work out that well. So you don't really need to worry that much. It will do the trick. Now coming back into our last comp, this is the Cubes 3, right? Where we have everything set up together. It's usually a good practice that you add an adjustment layer and just fine tweak the colors, make some color correction. But I think that we're actually pretty good. Obviously, before anything, I should make a RAM preview, although this is going to take a while, so I'm going to skip forward this part. but it's always a good practice just to see if everything looks okay in animation, right, with movement. Okay, so now we have our RAM preview built. Let's take a look at it. And this is the time that you take a closer look and see what can you improve. And what I'm going to improve right now is I'm going to brighten a little bit these corners over here and there on our background, and I'm going to add a vignette on top of everything so that these parts over here and there, they kind of get a little bit more darkened. It's going to be easy, so let's do it right away. So let's go over into our cubes 2 and into our background. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring this color a little bit up, like so. Okay. Doing good. Not so bad. Maybe a little bit more. Just a touch. And okay. That looks slightly better. And in our final comp over here on our cubes 3, we're gonna add a new solid. We're gonna make it black and call it vignette or something like it. And we're gonna click over here on our ellipse tool once more, or double click on it, sorry. We're going to invert the mask, open the mask dialog, and increase the feather a bunch, and then expansion, increase the expansion and increase it a bit more like that. Maybe double click on the mask and bring it a little bit like so we can have some dark over here, and maybe increase the feather and play with the opacity a bit, like maybe like so. So small difference, but as I said several times before, details, they do matter. Okay, so we're pretty much done. Let's make another RAM preview. So here's our final output. As I mentioned before, if you do have the time to invest on tweaking those small details and fine-tuning everything, you will get better results. If you do, for example, as I do pretty often, step away from the computer for a while, maybe 1 hour, if you can, maybe 24 hours, and come back, you will immediately find those spots, those little details that you can improve, and do it right away. Some stuff that you didn't see it before, they become really pretty obvious once you actually go back and take another look. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to click that like button, share it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, keep those comments flowing and all that good stuff. My name is Gustavo Maia for mymotiongraphics.tv. I'll see you in another video. Until then, bye bye.